So I started thinking out of the box how I could help my students to get better in their writing task. So through this, I decided to take them out on some trips in the school, ask them to write about their personal experiences. So through this, I discovered that many of them could actually write better when they see the real thing that they want to talk about. And this, of course, over time, help them to begin to develop confidence in writing. So before I move too far, I would like to talk about the objectives of this session. At the end of the session, the participants should be able to discover practical approaches to teaching writing through storytelling using realia. Also, they should be able to recognize tasks to use to motivate their students to do collaborative tasks to develop creative writing. And it is also important that teachers will take away with them the connotation of setting up tangible and time-bound goals to support their students through the development of writing. Next. So I would like to start by asking us to give me some responses in the chat box. What is realia? I would love to see your responses in the chat box. What realia is? What is realia? Can you define it and give me some examples? Can you give some examples? Give me the definition of realia. Thank you so much for your responses. Good. Someone says good real object. That's quite straightforward answer to it. Please let me have more responses from you. Thank you so much for your responses in the chat box. I want to know my audience. Please make your comments in the chat. Thank you. Expecting more responses about what realia is and examples of realia. Thank you for your responses. Wow. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I can see a lot of responses there. Beautiful. So I want to summarize all our responses. We will all agree that realia are tangible objects that we can see and use to teach our students, that they can touch, they can feel it. Wonderful. So we are good to go. Next. Now, let's go over how often do you teach writing in your classroom? How often do you teach writing? Well, in my own context, we teach writing every week. There's a curriculum that we normally follow, the scheme of work. In that scheme, we have writing activity every week. So I don't know how it is in your context. Can I have responses to that? And do you give example of can you also give example of writing tasks that you use in your classroom? How often do you teach writing? Can you give examples of writing tasks that you have used in the classroom to teach your students? Can I have more? Wow, beautiful. Beautiful responses. Visual aids, wonderful. Objects and materials for everyday life. Beautiful. Thank you for your responses. Wow, thank you so much. Thank you for your responses. Do your students like writing tasks? Do they really like writing tasks? How can you measure whether they like it or not? I would like to know if they like to write. Thank you so much for your responses. I would like to know if they write. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Wow, beautiful. Thank you. Yes, somebody said I teach writing thrice a week. Wonderful. That's good to know. Wonderful. That's good to know. I teach writing twice a week. That's great. Thank you. Now, I would like to ask, are you able to identify the major challenges of your students? Can you make comment on that again, please? Make comment on the major challenges you have noticed in your students while teaching them writing in the class. Could you please say something about that? For my students, I've already said that earlier on, they find it very difficult to build up words to make up a very good body for their essay. Oh, somebody said once a week for 100 hours. Beautiful examples, writing letters, arguments. Yes, I do that also in my context. Beautiful. Thank you for your responses. Thank you so much. Writing is difficult. Yeah, that's you like that's true. It's difficult, but we still have to teach our students because it's part of the learning skill, English skills that we have to imbibe in our students. So it's important we pay attention to helping them to write. You know, somebody said I teach writing on a weekly basis for a whole semester. That's wonderful. Writing short reports, great to know. Great to know. Thank you. Okay, grammar, spelling, flow of ideas. Thank you for Tahira. Manuel says that it's how to write some words. Well, for primary school session, it will be something like that. They will have to write words, then sentences, and we build them up eventually to write. We write narrative writing, instructional writing, autobiography, beautiful. Language challenges, fine. Thank you so much for your engagement. Thank you. I'm enjoying the session. Thank you so much. Next. Next one. Thank you. Now we can actually use realia to create different descriptive styles that will appeal to the senses of our students. You will agree with me that our students, some of them are their auditory aspect of them is very good, while some are visually inclined, but all together we need to help them with realia to actually bring all these things to fore. You know, when you use observation with the real objects, it will help our students to feel what we're talking about. They can touch it, they can see it, and they can also hear what we are trying to show them. So all this put together will help them to observe well and build up words to write very well. So we can try out some things with our students. For example, we can bring in a plastic bottle like this into our classroom and ask our students to write something about it. We can, we can bring this in and ask them to write something about this. We can ask them to write about the reusable world of a plastic bottle. This is something that every student has seen before, and some of them do try out their hands on making this to be something else. They can use it to make skipping ropes. They can use it to make the cover can be used to make foot mats and what have you. So we can actually bring something very simple like this into the classroom and ask our students to write short narrative on it. So when we do this, we are actually helping our students to develop words, to form words together to write something about this. Next. Now, I would like to ask us a question again. Do you use realia to teach writing? Do you use realia to teach writing? Do you use realia to teach writing in the class? Then how often do you use it? Oh, so I can still see some comments about the challenges of our students' fear. Well, yes, some of our students do fear, they lack vocabularies. Well, that's good. I have the same challenge with my students too, until I started introducing them to real objects that they can use to develop their writing. And how often do you use realia? If you do use it in your class, do you use it at all? Then how often do you use it? I would like to see your responses in the chat. Yes, some people say no. Well, some say right now, I do not. But some said they have never used it. Some people are saying sometimes. Well, some are saying, do realize are they relevant to every writing session? We're going to find out as we move on in the session. We're going to discover tasks that we're going to use to do that in our session. Some said most often, some said sometimes. Well, we're going to see if we need to really do this often and how it really enhance the writing skill of our students. Get to know. Yes, some people are saying yes, they do. Some said not at all. Well, let's kind of move forward Now, does it make for some of us that do use it, does it make your teaching more engaging? Does it make your teaching more engaging as you use it in the class? Does it make it more engaging? Do you have more participatory activities from participation rather from your students? Well, some said they use objects at times to generate AI images. Wow, that's beautiful. Bringing technology into realia. Fine, that's good to know. There's some fun, well, some enjoy it. Oh wow, that's good to know. Some say it's engaging. Wow, that's interesting to know. Let's move on. Next. Now, realia, like some of us have agreed, are real objects that we bring into the classroom as teaching aids. Now, teaching aids, of course, we all know, enhances our teaching in the class. It helps us to actually help our students to get more understanding, to learn better, and to be able to identify with what we're trying to pass across to them. But somebody just said in the chat box now that they use he or she uses teach with fruits and vegetables. That's wonderful realia to bring into the class. That's good. Then they can be talked about. We can also write about them. As we show them in the classroom to our students, we can talk about it. We can also write about them. Next. Now, why do we use realia to teach writing? Now, to answer some of the questions some of us have asked, that is it relevant to use realia to teach writing? Now, when we use realia to teach writing, it makes learning memorable. There's a way it connects with our students' memories, helps them to hold on to pictures of what you have shown them, so they are able to build up their writing from the experience, from the observation of the realia that we've shown them in the classroom. So this actually help them to get more connected to their writing activity. Now, it creates connection between objects and words. Now, when you present a realia for your students, they tend to be able to build up words with relation to the object you are showing them, or to the trips you have taken them to in the school environment. Now, we don't have to look for realia somewhere, something very expensive. We can always get realia around us in our school environment. It also enhances recall of information. It makes recall of information easier for our students. So it brings to fore and it makes them to retain what they have seen, so they'll be able to write better when they see the object that they want to write about, or the scenario that you have painted for them to write about. It also provides visual aid to engage our students. You know, when we present that to them in the class, it gives them the ability to see what we are trying to talk about, and so they will be able to write about that thing that they're actually visualizing, they're seeing at the moment. So it makes them participate better. You know that our teaching should be students learner centered. So when we bring up realia in the class, it improves the engagement of our students in the classroom. So it's important that we bring realia into the classroom when we are teaching them writing. It will help them to build up words to write their essays or write their argumentative writing, whatever kind of writing, if it's even report writing. When we bring realia into the class, it helps them to engage better in the class. Can you please add more reasons to this in the chat box? Could you please add more reasons why you think realia would be beautiful to use in the class to inspire our students to write better? Could you please add more to what you have on the screen? What you think can help our students in using realia? You know, somebody said easy to remember objects, beautiful. Somebody said to teach abstract concepts using realia, friendship. Well, let's see, let's go on. We'll still discover how it is. Thank you. Some said it involves visual aids. Wow, that's good. Somebody said it helps them to remember objects. Others says it makes learning more realistic. Yes, to the students, it makes it more real when we bring in the objects to the class. Now let's progress. We'll see how far we can go with using realia in the classroom next. Now, before we move further, I would like us to look at some practical tasks that we can use in the classroom. Now, this beautiful site on the British Council website talks a lot extensively about how we can use realia to teach in the class. The first one is using what's around you. You know, we don't have to look around for expensive realia, expensive objects, expensive teaching aids. We can always get things around us to present to our students in the classroom. So when you go to that site, you will see a lot of things that you can use in your classroom to teach your students writing task as far as realia is concerned. Now for the next one, it says teacher knowing your subject. Here, you can actually use realia to enhance your teaching as a teacher in the classroom. If that site will give you insight, more understanding of how you can use realia as a teacher to help your students get better in their writing task. Now, this very last activity resonates with me, and it's very good for primary school teachers. We can actually bring in a bag into the classroom, a cloth bag. You can bring it into the class and put in a lot of stuff like balls, rulers, tape, paper tape, and what have you. Anything that you can find within the classroom, you can put it inside the bag, then you can ask your students to touch the bag, whatever they feel, then you ask them to write about it. This is a very good activity for some of us that teach in the primary school, and it will be very interesting, and of course it will be fun for our students to feel something and begin to write about the shape, about what it is used for. So with this, they'll be able to develop their writing. So for primary school students, they can write the words, they can write few sentences on whatever they felt in the bag as they touch it. So these are beautiful ways we can introduce writing to our students. So there are other resources that I find out from the British Council beyond the three that we have on the screen that you can also search for when you go to the British Council Teach for Africa Teaching English.org UK. You'll find many and lots of resources that you can use in your class to help your students develop interest in writing. Next. I'm happy about your responses in the chat box. Thank you so much. I'm enjoying the session. Now you can see some examples of realia on the screen. Now, stone is everywhere in the world. We can bring in a stone into the class and ask our students, what can it be used for? We can ask them to write about that, a statue. Now, the picture on the screen is the section in my school. That building is the building in my school, and you can see a statue in front of the building, an arm holding an axe. So we can ask our students to write something about this statue. What does this arm stand for? Is this particular statue is a cultural artifact in my context. So we may have something like that in our school. If not, it's not compulsory you have the statue in your school. It could be something else. In fact, I even have another statue in my school, a statue of the students in the school uniform. We can take our students out on a short trip to see something like that, and you can ask them to write about it. You can just bring newspapers, old newspapers, into the classroom and ask your students to look at some issues, some pictures in the newspaper. Then they can generate ideas from that, from what they have read and from the pictures they have seen. You can also bring in ideas that are not within the context of your students from newspapers and magazines. For example, in my context in Nigeria, we don't have Disneyland. That's the recreation center, which of course is not in Nigeria, it's in the US. You can actually bring a picture of that in a magazine or newspaper and bring a section of that and ask your students to see it and write something about that place. Whether they would love to be there, maybe a narrative essay. I would love to travel to the US and see the Disneyland. So things like this can help our students to develop their writing skill, to develop interest in writing when they see pictures like that in newspapers or magazines. Then we can take them to places of interest in the school premises, right? On the school premises, you don't have to take them too far from the school. But if you can afford it, if the school management can agree with you, you can take them away from the school. For example, in my town, we have the very big rock. They call it Olumoro. You know, a teacher can get the consent of the school authority to take students on a visit to that site and eventually ask them to write about that. So when they see tangible things like that, they tend to begin to form words in their mind and they are able to write better. Now, let's next. Oh, somebody said we can bring in old bus tickets. That's beautiful into the class and ask students to write about the journey. That's wonderful. That's beautiful contribution there. Thank you so much. I'm enjoying your contribution in the chat box. Thank you so much. Now, I want to quickly move into tips on how to use realia to teach writing. Tips on how to use realia to teach writing. Now, we can recreate realia in the classroom. We can bring in the plastic bottle that I showed us the other time into the class. Then we can ask our students to discuss things that we can bring out of that particular realia. That's a plastic bottle. Now, here in my hand is what is made out of a plastic bottle. This is a skipping rope made by some of my students out of a plastic bottle. Now, this is made from the ring on the neck of the bottle. That is how they got this skipping rope. So we can recreate realia and ask our students to write about how they got this into life, how they created this. You can ask them to write about it, and that will be fun for them because they've practiced it, they've done it at their leisure, maybe from home, so they'll be able to write something tangible about that. So that through that, you are developing their writing skill. Also, crafts can be brought into the classroom. We can bring in baskets, we can bring in mats. In my context, we have mats, locally made mats, pots that we have made locally can be brought into the classroom and students can be asked to look at it and write something about this craft. Then we can also create school magazine. We can create school magazine through realia. So when we take our students out on short trips, we can ask them to write something about it. Through this, the teacher can compile such stories and use it to create a school magazine with pictures. They can be as simple as black and white magazine. It doesn't have to be colored, but we can also make use of an Android phone to take pictures of those things that our students are writing about. Then we can paste this on the school notice board, or we can also use them to teach in the class. So short stories can be pasted on the school board. When we do this, our students will tend to want to get interested. Many of them, as they read stories on the board, they will want to do the same. So short stories that are pasted on the board will motivate other students to want to write their own stories as well. Next. Thank you so much. Somebody said how the island can be used as dot potential. Wow, nice. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for your responses. Now, I want to take us through some activities that we can actually engage our students in to help them write very well. Now, the first one is story club. We can motivate our students to create short stories. They can be imaginative stories, and they can be stories about school events. For example, we just had inter-house sports in my school. As a language teacher, I actually told my students to write short stories about the inter-house sport. You know, they've just witnessed that inter-house sport in the school. So it's so easy for my students to begin to write about it. So somehow they are beginning to develop writing, learning how to report something they've watched, an event they participated in. So through that, I saw many of them writing beautiful stories about the event, how we started, how we practiced during the inter-house sports practice sessions and all that. So when we motivate them from the standpoint of the school event, we can actually help our students to get better in their writing activities. Now, you can engage them in this through pair work or group work. You can group our students, ask them to write about the event. If you have a very large class, you can divide them into maybe 4 or 5 groups where the students will begin to write on this events that have taken place in the school. So teachers, of course, you will support them by editing the stories that they've written, and of course, you can create a compilation of these stories, which of course can be developed into presentation on the assembly ground, can be developed into school magazines, and what have you. Now, how could you use this in your context? In your own context, how could you present a story club in your school? How could you do this in your context? Can you please respond in the chat box? I would like to see your responses in the task box. In the chat box, thank you for your responses. In the chat box, thank you. I can see some responses about this. I want to know, well, somebody said you could ask them to write about events that they've attended in the environment, the school environment. It could even be maybe a cultural day in the school. It could be even about the girl child day that we had yesterday. You can ask your student to write about that event that has taken place in my school. You know, some of them, many of them will be able to put their words together because they've seen how that girl child day was organized, how it was done in the school. Thank you for your engagement. Well, somebody said, I make my students write stories about their holiday. Beautiful. They create a kind of newsletter. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for your engagement. Next. Now, here is role play. Now, you can have role play for 2 3 minutes in the classroom and ask your students to write about the role play. You can create short fun activities with cultural artifacts in your context. In my context, we have baskets everywhere. It's not difficult to get a basket in the school. It's not difficult to get a broom in the school. So we can get these items and ask some of our students to create a market scene. Now we can have a buyer and we can have a seller in the classroom. So 2 3 minutes role play, and you begin to ask your students to observe as they do the observation on those 2 or 3 4 5 students acting out this market scene. Other students will begin to observe them. So you can now group them and ask your students to write about a short story about what they just watched. Now, don't let the activity go beyond 2 3 4 5 minutes, because most often we have only 40 minutes to spend in the classroom. So you can create role play in the class for your students to act out, and they will begin to respond through writing. They'll write about what you've presented, a short scene, just 2 3 4 5 minutes, then they'll begin to write about it. Now, can you suggest more activities that can be replayed in the chat box? Can you suggest more activities that can be replayed in the chat box? Can you do that? Can you suggest more activities that can be replayed in the chat box? Thank you for your responses. Thank you. Somebody said that's Janet T. I do ask them to bring a family photo and ask them to write story on it. Beautiful. That's wonderful realia in the classroom. Many of them will be able to say something beautiful about their family. I ask students to write story about cultural practices. Wonderful. Food day at school. Wonderful. I know many of them would love to write about food. That's interesting. They can write about the social activity day. Yeah. Yes, I do ask my students to write about the literary day in my school, and I've seen them respond beautifully well when I ask them to write about it. But wonderful. Somebody said telling them to use folk tales in their area to translate into work. That's beautiful. What that's wonderful. Actually, you can ask them to write about folk tales that they've learned, stories that parents have told them. They can write about that. That's wonderful. That's good. Encourage them to write good essay, giving them a short drama in the class. That can even be done through, you can bring in a PC into the class and ask them to watch very short story from a PC as realia, then they can write about it. Wonderful. Somebody said short model stories to motivate them to write. That's beautiful. That's wonderful. I'm so happy about your engagement. Thank you so much for the responses in the chat box. They can bring in their favorite toy. Wonderful. That will do very well for our primary school students. They can bring their favorite toy into the class and you can ask them to write few words about it. I like my toy. It's beautiful. It's airy. Wonderful. The primary school students will really love that. To bring in their toys in the language class, that's beautiful. Wonderful responses. Thank you so much. Thank you for your responses. Thank you so much. Next. Now, we can also like ask our students to keep journals and diaries. This culture is waning. I asked some of my students in the school, do you have a diary? Even some of them don't even know what diaries are, but they know what an Android phone is. They know how to chat on Facebook, on WhatsApp, and what have you. But many of them don't get to take their pen to write diaries, to keep journal of important events to them, maybe their birthdays, family celebration, things like that. So if we encourage our students to keep journal, we can actually get them to write under informal situation. It doesn't have to be in the class alone that they can write. When you encourage them to keep journals and diaries, they get to write outside the classroom. We can also encourage them to write journal about a visit to a school farm. What you are seeing on the screen is a picture of my school farm, and you can see some of my students in white uniform on the farm. So if you take your students to maybe the school farm, you can ask your students to write about it. Now that's the beginning of the planting season. So we were planting maize on the farm. So you can see some of my students working there. So you can ask your students to write about this. They can begin to watch the progress of the plants. They can write about how the plants are maturing bit by bit. So you are still helping them to write something. You are encouraging them to write. So with this, many of your students will be able to make reports. They'll be able to observe and make reference to how well the plants are doing on the farm. So when you do this, your students can also talk about the farm implements. You can get them to talk about the rake, the kind of soil you have on the school farm, the kind of plants you have on the school farm. All that can engage your students. So 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes visit to the school farm, then you take them back into the classroom, then you ask your students to write a journal, to keep a journal. They keep on going to the farm during their spare time to write about things that they are seeing as development of the plants on the school farm. Then this can also propel them, encourage them to begin to write private diaries, journals about moments that they enjoy, tasks they engage in personally. So through this, they get to write on their own, even outside the school environment, outside the English language class. So they get to write more and more. Next. Now, we can also engage our students in describing direction, following direction, how they can describe the direction to people. This is the cross section of my school. My school is quite a large and beautiful school, as you can see. So you can take your students to a place like this and ask them to describe, this is the entrance to my school. You can ask them to write and describe how somebody can get to their school. Then you can take it further by asking them to write how somebody can locate their houses as well. So they can use landmarks like large old mango tree, a stone wall is very close to my school. I have a refilling station right beside my school. Teach them to use landmark to make description about their school or about their home. So the students can work together in group to describe the school. They can work together in pairs to describe their houses in the classroom. So this motivation will actually help our students to be able to write better and become better writers, and they'll be able to describe more when they need to do that. And that's an opportunity for them to also help their friends to locate where the school is. Even if they have pen pals who are far away from them, they can write something about their school, describing how someone can get to the school. That's great to know. Somebody said, watch documentary on Get Child Day and ask students to write about it. Beautiful. Next. Next. Now, you don't have to always be the one to bring in the realia into the classroom. You can ask your students to bring something as realia into your class. So that will make it more fun. And of course, the students are participating better now. And this will make them to have a sense of belonging in the classroom. So you can use students' realia, things that they brought to school in their bags. For example, as you see on the screen, you can see a school bag, water bottle, pencils, crayons, watercolor, and pencil case, books. All these, you can ask your student to write about this, depending on their level. Depending on the level of your students, you can actually engage them in writing on something about this. Now you can say, I was born in this and this, I was created in the UK, and somebody brought me to Nigeria, and here I am in social market, and somebody has bought me, and so I'm in this class. So students can write interesting things about what they brought into the class. They can be, I remember very well, somebody is talking about adult learners. Well, I remember when I was in the university, a lecturer brought a very large, impressive picture into the department. He brought us out of the lecture room and told us to write about that particular picture. These activities can be used in all levels of our students. It can be used to help them enhance their writing skill. So all this can be used. It's not the teacher's task alone to bring in the realia into the class. Your students can also bring the realia into the class, and this will make it more participatory. Next. Now, short trips in the school premises. Students can be taken to the sport facilities, to the school clinic for observation. You may not have a very large sport facilities in your school, but you may have a small field where students do play football. You may have a small school clinic or maybe a dormitory where students eat. Maybe if you have hostel in your school, you can take your students to places like that and ask them to write about it. What you are looking at in the picture is the picture of the school clinic. The building that you have a tree standing in front of it is the clinic, is the school clinic. So if you take your students to such a place on the school premises, they can look at it and begin to describe the school premises. You can take them inside the school clinic. Then they get to see the medicines, the bed, and if it's the sports facility, they can see the sport equipment. You can ask them to write about it and to talk about their best sports and how some of them, they even want to become sports persons in the future. They will get to write about this in the class. So these are beautiful ways to really help our students to engage well in writing activities in the class. Could you please tell us some of the exciting places you can take your children, your students to in your school? Places other than sports facility, school clinic that you have in your school, places that your students will find very interesting. Wow, somebody said home economics lab. Lots of things to be in the home economics lab. Wonderful. Thank you so much. You can take them to a lot of places in the school, maybe even the fine art studio. Yeah, if they get there, they will see a lot of drawing that they can talk about, they can write about. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Can you give me more examples of trips at places in your own context where you can take your students to? More places. Wow. School kitchen, computer room, beautiful. All these places are right there in our school. If you take our students there, they do some observation, then they begin to write about what they've seen. You'll be surprised at so much words your students will be able to gather together and put into writing. The school garden, wonderful. The school canteen, wonderful. ICT lab, beautiful. These are wonderful responses from my audience. Thank you so much. The language laboratory, wonderful. I wish I had one in my school. We don't have that in my school. Beautiful. The school kitchen. So I think most schools will have that. The computer room, wonderful. So all these places are there for us to take our students to, then we ask them to write something beautiful about those places. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Next. Now, this is an engagement that will help your students to think critically. It's important that we engage our students in activities that will help them to think critically. This will really help them to write imaginative stories. Now, we can take our students to a place of interest in the school, on the school premises, like we have just talked about, and ask them to write imaginative stories about the place. You can paint a scenario for your students. For example, you can say something like, imagine this is an island and you and your group have been living here for a month. How would you survive? What are the activities that you can do as a group in that on that particular island? So the students will have to think out of the box to write something about this story, that this scenario that you have painted for them. So they will engage in thinking activity. So they will begin to think and come up with words and to develop an imaginative story. Now, after they've done this in the class, this is a very tasking one, that when you see a group who has done so well and quickly, you can actually ask them to do a presentation in the class, and that will serve as a reward for the best group. So the best group, the fastest and the best group, will stand up and do a presentation. But you can go further than that. If you are in the primary session, you can give them stars that you have made with cardboard. You can place those badges on the school uniform of the students. When you bring in reward into the activities that you engage students in the class, they tend to want to do more. So that, of course, will make them to want to write better the next time you bring the topic of writing on the board. So this and many more activities are things that we can apply in our classroom to help our students write very well. Now, asking students to write on big topics like they will see in the exam when we are teaching them to write may be difficult for them to develop writing. But when we show them realia in different forms, like bringing things, real objects into the class, taking them to sites on the school environment, and asking them to write about it, this can really help them to become better and creative writers in the school. Next. And that is the beautiful things that I came up with. I've used this for my students, and I can see them doing better and getting to become more and more creative writers. And at the moment, we have a story club in my school where my students develop stories and they tend to present it on the assembly ground, they present it in the classroom, and many of them are striving to get better at the introduction of realia. These are more resources where you can get to see more activities that you can use to develop writing in your classroom. I want to appreciate everyone for coming in into the session. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you for your engagement. Thank you so much. I thank you for the responses. Thank you so much. Thank you, the British Council, for giving me this opportunity to do this session. I really appreciate everyone. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Abel. And thank you, Blessing, for working behind the scene so much.
Thank you so much, Iyabo. That was so interesting. I saw an excellent comment in the chat, and it said, "This webinar brings brightness to our teaching skills." Isn't that a wonderful thing to say? And I don't think I've ever seen so much activity in the
Thank you
chat.
so much.
So many people have so many great ideas, excellent, lively. All your classes look wonderful for students. I love all the fact that you brought in all these things like the plastic bottle and the skipping rope. And I love those personal stories and the story of, for example, I am an apple. Great to see all those sorts of things. We've got a few questions, but before then, we're doing this takeaway tips from the webinars now. I'd like to ask all of you to please try out at least one activity in the next week with one of your classes, and then report back in the English Connects Telegram group discussion on Friday. And this will actually force you to process all of the things that you've looked at here. And here are some suggestions of simple things you can try out in class or carry on with the things you're already doing. For example, teacher bringing realia into class, students writing about it, students bringing realia into class and writing about it, using newspapers to spark writing ideas, and these great ideas about trips outside around school. So please try out something related to that, report back, and Iyabo will be at the discussion in the Telegram group on Friday for you to share your ideas. Okay, so we now have a bit of time for some questions. I've been looking through the chat and there were some really interesting questions. One of them, do you think realia is relevant to every writing session? What do you think about that, Iyabo?
Yes, I think you can actually, it depends on the way you use the realia. Now, if I want to teach my students argumentative, I can actually bring in some things that relate to the two sides of the argument into class. Then I ask my students to take sides and talk about the two sides of writing. Now, if it's descriptive writing, of course, that's clearly stated in the session. If you bring in an object into the class, your students get to see it and they begin to talk about that particular object. Also, when you bring in a narrative aspect of writing into the class, when you have taken them to a trip, your students get to narrate what they've seen. So you can actually cut across every type of writing if you manipulate your realia in such a way that you use it to engage your students in whatever you want to teach them. You can bring that into any kind of writing activities in the classroom.
Maybe you need to be a bit creative sometimes. There was one comment, interesting. Not all objects can be brought into class as realia. For example, an angel. That's a good example. Great.
Yes, you
And
can bring that in a
yeah,
magazine. The
and another
picture
question.
can be in a magazine or newspaper.
Yeah, another question. How do you teach abstract concepts like death and friendship through realia? Any ideas?
Oh, that's yeah. Abstract concepts are not tangible, they are not real objects that can be brought into the class, but it can be role played. If you ask a student to have a role play about friendship, about how to be kind to people, then you can actually use that as a realia about abstract issues and
Why
objects like
not have
that.
something that reminds you of your friend, for example, an object, bring in an object that reminds you of your friend, and that can symbolize your friendship or something that your friend has given you. Can be, can't it?
Yeah,
Or maybe something that
thank you.
someone who's
That's
passed
that.
away, a grandfather, grandmother, maybe something that symbolizes that.
Repeated.
Yeah.
Thank
Another
you.
question. How can realia be used to exploit the potential of dyslexic and dysgraphic pupils? So pupils with learning difficulties. Have you had any experience with that?
I haven't had any experience with that, but I think if with patience and the creativity of a teacher, you can actually help students with dyslexia. In fact, I believe such students will benefit even more with realia because many of them, their attention span is short, and using realia to teach them will really help them to focus when they're seeing the object right in front of them and they're trying to get their attention to see the object they are trying to talk about or they're trying to write about. They'll be able to keep up with the trend of the lesson at that point in time as you're presenting the realia to them. I think it will really help
I
students
think
with
you're right because it adds this kinesthetic element, kinesthetic and
yeah.
visual element, and it makes it more concrete, doesn't it? Which is good for everyone, especially learners with any learning difficulties. Yeah. I noticed someone has written in the chat a question, how do I join the Telegram group on Friday? I wonder if Abel or Steve could post the link
Yeah,
in the group there.
the link's been posted already,
Excellent.
but we'll
Brilliant.
post it again. So
Great. I encourage everyone to join that as well, with lots of other discussions as well. Another question, to what extent should teachers help students write their stories? What do you think, Iyabo?
Yeah, well, so in that wise, we can motivate them to write. We wouldn't hold pens for them, of course, but we can motivate them to write. But our students too mostly are at different stages. So we can help them with individualized support. If we see some of them are not coming up as expected, a teacher can give such students individualized support to ensure that they progress as well at their own pace. Since most of our students are not on the same level, I encountered that in my classroom as well, because some of them are fast learners, while some are a bit slow. So for the slow learners, you can actually engage them in more tasks and support them through your individualized support. When you give them this, they can actually get better at writing as you focus more on them.
Excellent. I would love to be a student in one of your classes. I think we're coming to an
Thank
end now.
you.
There are more questions. I know I've seen more questions, but please save them and ask them in the Telegram group on Friday. And thank you so much, Iyabo, and thank you everyone else for your brilliant suggestions. It's been such an interesting webinar. Over to Steve to close for
yeah,
today.
thank you so much, Iyabo. I think you shared some fantastic ideas here, and I look forward to everyone who attended today to try them next week in their classrooms. And I hope these approaches are going to be useful to help your learners improve their writing. Thanks everyone for attending. It's been a pleasure having you today, and we look forward to having you on Friday for the Telegram group discussion where Iyabo is going to be expanding on the ideas here. And if you have any follow-up questions that you'd like to ask, it's a great opportunity to actually catch up with her. So best of luck in implementing these ideas, and I see you on Friday next week. Thank you so much, everyone.